Okay, so we have a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have Matis here. You're an incredible artist. You've been, created some songs that have been super impactful to many people throughout the world. Of course, a lot of people know One Day and how the unity that brought together through the Olympics and through other areas. But you've been, behind a bunch of different great hits, and now you've got a new EP coming out that's exciting called Hold the Fire. And that's also, there's a lot of deepness and spirituality to that. So I'm excited to have you here and to get into your story.
Thanks, Ben.
Awesome. So early on, Matis, how did your passion for making music begin? What inspired you to want to be an artist?
Well, I guess as a young kid, I just remember loving music, listening to Michael Jackson and the music that my parents were playing. And always loved music, but I never really took to an instrument. And then when I was in high school, I got a injury on my collarbone from skiing and took me out from the hockey season. And ice hockey was my first love, sort of before music. And then I think right around that time, I started listening to Bob Marley, and I really felt connected deeply with his message and his music. And it made me question, to some extent, my own identity based on the Old Testament lyrics. So the only other place or context that I had ever seen that before was in like in Hebrew school, after like Sunday school or whatever. So I became curious about like Exodus and Zion and Judah and Solomon and Sheba and all of that and the history. And it's sort of at the same time I really connected with the music. So that sort of sent me on a journey of listening to reggae music. Prior to that, I had heard reggae music. My cousins are Bayesian from Barbados, so
Huh.
they would come up for summer camp. So I had heard a lot of early dance hall music, but really, I really fell in love with it through Bob Marley, and then started exploring other bands of that era, more like Steel Pulse and Black Uhuru, and then roots, like dub music, like The Scientist and King Tubby and that kind of stuff, Roots Radix. And then that led me into dance hall music of the day, which was, at first was, like Beanie Man, but then came this wave of what was called conscious dance hall, and that was the main artist that influenced me was Sizzla Kalonji, and that artist had a huge influence on me, as well as Buju Banton and Capleton and all of that. So as that was going on, I also this is all pre Matisyahu.
Mhm.
I got my record deal in my early 20s, so this is all like in high school, but leading up to it. At the same time, I went to Israel when I was 16. That had a huge impact on me, not in the religious aspect, but culturally and just as a sense of everything. And while listening to all that reggae music, sort of searching for my own identity as an adolescent, 16, and being in Israel, all of those things kind of came together to sort of create some spiritual kind of
Mhm.
journey that I set up upon. And from there, I wanted to say at the same time, growing up in the 90s outside of New York City, hip hop music was hugely impactful. So while it wasn't my music of choice, there weren't a lot of kids that listened to reggae at White Plains High School.
Mhm.
So I would partake. I figured out that I could beatbox
Mhm.
like pretty good, better than anybody else that was around me. I learned it really quickly, which I had a hard time learning instruments, but when it came to like using the vocals and all of that, and I started to explore music really through that channel and bass and drums and rhythm and time and all of that. So I started freestyling for my friends. During freestyle sessions, I would beatbox, and that became my way of like original way of performing, I would say. And then at that same time, I went to see like Common with the Roots backing him at Tramps in New York City, with Razel beatboxing, and that Kenny Muhammad came out and beatboxed with Razel. So this was right in that golden era and Lyricist Lounge and um, Mos Def and Talib Kweli and coming out of the whole era of Wu Tang and all of that. I mean, hip hop had a big effect. So there were certain rappers that affected me. Like there was a Jewish rapper from Wu Tang named Remedy, and he had a song called Never Again. He just actually put out a new song about sort of a diss track to Macklemore after his track that he put out. But then Killer Priest, for example, had an album called View from Masada. So I had been at the top of Mount Masada, and I found it interesting that a Wu Tang member had made a whole album based on, this Kabbalistic Judaism, basically. And so certain people along the way kind of affected me. And then at the same time with that, I went to see the band Fish play at the Centrum in Massachusetts, in Worcester, Massachusetts, and I dropped LSD again when I was 16 when I came back from Israel. That had a huge impact on me in terms of music. I fell in love with that band and with the style of improvisation, even though as a singer, that's not really what I do, but it's something that taught me a lot about music. So I started listening to a lot of that and having those psychedelic experiences. So all of that kind of fueled the fire to this combination of musics. And then when I really was in college and I really became Hasidic, I kind of like stopped listening to music altogether. I got rid of, all my music and anything that had to do with pop culture at all. Um, and moved to a basement in Crown Heights, basically didn't see the light for about 2 years. And during that time, I studied Torah and I learned all of the Hasidic songs, and that was really the only outlet for musicality. And began to envision different things happening with that music. So, like incorporating these Hasidic melodies and this like groups sing-alongs in this kind of minor and kind of like dark feel, but with you know the sound of like a drummer in the subway playing hip hop beats behind it. And so I started to imagine these cross section of music as I got deeper into it. And as I studied Torah, I had this whole arsenal of material to choose from. So when I would learn something like, from the forest itself comes the handle for the axe, just like an idea that I was learning about, and then okay, that would make a really great hook. So I started jotting those kind of things down. And then on Fridays, I would go into the city and I had this like route basically where if you're a Hasidic, you in Chabad, it was the one day we would leave the yeshiva and we would get these like, tuna fish sandwiches or egg salad sandwiches in 770 and like all these Shabbos candles and tefillin and pamphlets and go into the city. And so I had a route of Jews that I would visit like around Chelsea, like about 8 or 9 shops, let's say. And so I asked my rabbi if I could go record music, and he said as long as I handed that route off to somebody else. So I gave that route to a new yeshiva guy, and I went and I started writing and recording on Fridays in Dumbo, with which is the last remaining loft in Dumbo that hasn't been like sold and bought because of the people that live there are so like stubborn. But one of those people is a drummer named Elon Cohen from Israel. And we made this album there with a guy named Danny Seliger, who worked at Raucous Records, who was an Orthodox Jew, but was like afraid to wear his yarmulke to work, going to work with like Mos Def and Talib Kweli and all these guys. So he basically just saw me play in Chelsea at this shul on Lag BaOmer, and I only had like 3 songs at the time. I had gone to Philadelphia to record some songs that I had some ideas and stuff. So I had 3 songs that I had recorded on a CD with Discman. And every now and then I would go up on the roof of the yeshiva, and I would just like listen to that, and I would kind of hold on to the dream a little bit. And then at some point I got so deep into it that I realized that the ultimate sacrifice for me was the music. That was my dream, my passion. It was like, everything. And I made this decision that I'm not gonna do it anymore. I'm gonna like Isaac on the altar, like slaughter that part of myself. And then within like a few weeks from that moment, I got a call from an old friend who had gone to NYU Music Business School, Aaron Bisman, and he had just graduated and gotten a grant to start a label. He didn't have any distribution or anything, but he had some money and an office, and basically signed me, asked if I would be his first artist, and I said, like, well, what does that mean? He's like, well, let us just book you some shows, and and I got permission to start going and play shows. I would leave the yeshiva, take a train to Boston or something, and just different little shows and college shows. And the buzz started to build very, very quick because the music was pretty great. And the guys that were in my band were three guys from Manus Jazz School, from the New School, which is where I had gone to college prior to yeshiva. And they were guys that played at the Eureka Poets Cafe and backed up all the hip hop nights, the open mic nights. They understood how to play live hip hop music and reggae music and rock, but from a jazz improvisational background. So all the pieces kind of fit. And yeah, we they started booking me shows, and the first show I went to, there were several shows at campuses and different little things, but the first official like Matisyahu show in Brooklyn, I believe, I don't remember if it was a Hanukkah night or what it was, but it was at the Southpaw in Brooklyn. And I remember walking up, and in those days I would take my glasses off, so like when I would leave the yeshiva, so I wouldn't see any like billboards or posters or anything of women, and I would just study like Gemara, or I would like recite like stuff that I remembered. And I'm like walking up to the venue, and I remember like seeing literally like feet, like, oh man, there's a long line. And then I really thought we were like opening up for somebody, that there was another band that was playing, and there wasn't, and the show was sold out. And it immediately caught this like buzz because it was like something that was lacking, like a hole. And for Jews in New York and stuff that were not religious but just wanted to do something on Purim or Hanukkah that wasn't at the shul, and it was inspiring and it was cool. So we started just booking shows, and we went from, Southpaw to Mercury Lounge to, you know, uh, Bowery Ballroom to Irving Plaza to Webster Hall to Manhattan Civic Center, whatever it was, Hammerstein Ballroom, to 3 nights in Hammerstein Ballroom, and I mean it just really exploded very, very quickly. So I got there was interest from labels at the time, some smaller labels, some smaller indie labels. Um, One of them was called 456 Records, which was one of the Rifkin brothers, and um, the MTV, whatever. It's not important. I digress. But point is, I played a show at a yeshiva at like 8 o'clock in the morning. A guy came from a label and saw that show. It was like Rosh Chodesh or something like that, and basically, I ended up signing with them. Um, and he had a deal with Epic Records, an upstream deal. It was kind of like a new thing in the industry, this idea about upstreaming. He had left Epic at the height of his career as a VP. Everyone thought he was crazy, and then he signed this band Los Lonely Boys in a small label and made like a ton of money. It was like a whole new way of doing things, and so the label kind of like wanted him back, so they gave him his own imprint or whatever, and they had the ability to upstream after 100,000 physical sales or whatever. So this guy Michael was pretty smart, and he realized that I had put out this record, this roots reggae album, while I was still in yeshiva and stuff, but it didn't capture like the energy of the live show. He had connections down in Austin, Texas, and with Austin being kind of a cool music city and his connections, we thought the idea of doing Matisyahu at Stubbs would be kind of cool, would be a good idea.
Mhm.
And we did it, and we turned it around within a couple months, and it started selling, 30,000, 40,000 copies a week, like that. And before a couple of weeks, I was upstreamed, and I was a major artist at Epic with my poster next to Shakira's, when I would come in for the visits, and performing for their international conference like in Miami. So all the different Sony. So then that meant world tours and tour support and all of that, and that was the sort of the my initial real big record was a live album, which is kind of cool.
Definitely. So You had your own style. You figured out your own style. You were able to start getting traction. Why do you think King Without a Crown became such a big hit for you and was like such a breakout hit?
I think it King Without a Crown kind of like, I think King Without a Crown kind of like, I mean, it really was like the right representation of everything that Matisyahu, that like kind of that whole the mixture, you know.
Mhm.
It's like all those different ingredients, you know, like that hip hop beat and that rock solo and that kind of reggae feel in the chorus, the dance hall feel and the sounds, the energy, the words, all of that together. We did a nice job kind of. I don't know that there was anything at that time that sounded just like that. You know, it was a unique sound, but something that you're familiar with and could connect to. So, you know, that song took off. Really took off at radio. It did really well.
So it was kind of taking part of what was already out, but giving it its own spin,
Well,
making it a
we
little.
caught that moment, yeah, because it was live. So, you know, I mean, the live version is the version that we ended up recording a recorded version, but the live version is the one that actually in the end did better. So it was that energy, you know, that you can capture from a live album, from a young artist just breaking out, a lot feeling like I have a lot to prove. You know, a lot of people didn't take me seriously, and had spent all that time in yeshiva and felt very authentic and true to myself, and that kind of came across, I think.
So earlier on, I think when you were just starting out, you would kind of say you're Matt the Kid from New York, and you changed like your name you went by eventually was Matisyahu. Why did you land on that name, and what was the importance of it to you?
Well, that's just my Hebrew name in my English name in Hebrew. Matthew is Matisyahu. And that was just the name that I took on when I became religious. I wanted to start going by my Hebrew name, so that was like when I chose that name. You know, was when I was becoming religious.
So one of the songs that you're pretty well known for is "One Day." How did that song come about?
Well, I had released my first my live album, and then we rushed into the studio. They kind of gave me my choice of producer, and I chose to work with Bill Laswell, who had made this Bob Marley Ambient Dreams album that had been one of my favorite albums. And we made that album quite fast over the summer in Jersey, in between. Basically, I had turned it, we had made the live album and then kind of rushed in to make the youth album in between touring and stuff like that. And then the idea was to take your time, and in those days it was a very different kind of industry was different, and the whole concept of how to make music was very different. And so you would have to go to a studio and work with a producer and have instrumentalists and like all of that kind of stuff. And all of that was changing. But so I worked with a producer, and very meticulous producer, who had done one of the original Sublime albums. And at the time I was studying, um, I was now studying what's called Breslov Hasidus, which is a different sect of Hasidim, a different rabbi from that same time period in Eastern Europe. And see if this doesn't. And so basically, the story that he's most known for is called the Seven Beggars. And I had been studying that story with my teacher for quite some time, getting kind of deeper and deeper into it. And as we were doing that, we sort of started to cross into other realms of psychology and history and social context of all of these things, and to kind of take things a step deeper. And so I made an album with him, and then this very meticulous producer, David Kahn, very into the details. And I would go to David's. I'd ride my bike from Crown Heights basically to Williamsburg, because I liked the way they prayed in Williamsburg. Was like I found this minion there where there were barely 10 people, but they yell. They would like scream. And so I would go there. Then I would go to like meatpacking district, or what used to be that over there in Manhattan. I'd ride my bike, and I'd spend like 8, 9, 10 hours in the studio with David in his basement. And that went on for like months and months and months and months, you know. And prior to that, they got me a writing room at the pencil factory in Greenpoint when it had just opened up.
Huh.
And so I had different artists coming to work with me there, different writers and such. And so that whole process, you know, they were like, really take your time. It's really fine if you go away for a while, which is would be unheard of now, is like career suicide. If you're not like constantly putting out music, then people will forget about you very, very quickly. It's just the reality of how it works. So, but at that time, you know, so it was a little different, I guess. It didn't quite work. So I think it had already changed, but I was still going based on that old philosophy. And I spent like, I don't know, 2, 3 years making this album. You know, it was going to be called The Seven Beggars. And it was all about these seven stories of these seven
Mhm.
beggars and this whole concept album. And I at that time is right when things started shifting. All music was becoming available now on the internet. Record companies were really freaking out, trying to figure out what to do. And so they hired this woman who's a songwriter at the label at Epic to run the label, which was sort of unheard of to have someone with like no business background, a songwriter really, as the executive. And she was wild from London, from Britain, you know, and kind of like this old school kind of rocker vibe. This really cool lady. And she was just very blunt, and she just said, you know, this album's overproduced. There are no hits on this record. You know, I remember where I was when I got the call, like walking down the street, about to get onto the subway. And instead of sort of fighting her on it, or kind of taking it personally, I just tried to use it as an opportunity. And I asked her, I had just been on tour with an artist from Toronto named Kanon, and he had a song that no one had heard yet. Like the label hadn't even heard it yet. It was, when I get older, I will be stronger. They'll call me freedom, just like a waving flag. And then it goes back. So it was used eventually for the World Cup. But at the time, he was playing it every night, and he played me a recorded version of it. So I asked her to find me the producer who had co-written, co-produced that song with Kanan. She tells me it just so happens the A&R that I now brought from LA or whatever to work on, to be your A&R at the label, manages this group, you know, and we'll fly you out to LA, and we'll get some more tracks on that. We'll get a couple more tracks on the album. We'll keep the album as is, but we'll just like take a couple tracks off and add a couple tracks. Fine, whatever. I go out to LA, and I'm working with a couple of guys, a young engineer from Teaneck, New Jersey, and then these two young guys. And one of them is trying to get a record deal. He keeps kind of like leaving, not doesn't keep leaving, but I think we had a couple sessions, and each time he was either coming or going from some kind of showcase where he was, and he would come back to the studio. He'd be upset, and he'd be like, "Modest, you know, how did you get a record deal?" Record deal. And then, you know, I told him what I wanted. You know, I wanted like this anthem. I wanted something similar to Waving Flag or No Woman No Cry. There was, those type of chords. You know, something anthemic. And he brilliantly, you know, was able to really quickly cook it up. You know, different types of producers, people work in different ways. This guy's all over the place. He's on the keyboard, and then he's on the drum set, and he's the programming, and you know, he's telling me sing it more this way a little bit. And at some point, I leave the session and I go to find a kosher restaurant. It takes a lot of time and traffic all the way across town. I come back, and a lot of the song is rewritten basically, and they kept like, you know, my second verse, I think, is blood drenched pavement is the line. You know, they kept like most of my second verse, I think, but the chorus and whatnot is so that was one day, you know, but they nailed it. And it was the first time I'd really like allowed someone else to write really with me, or really, you know, rewrite stuff for me. And so that guy who was looking for a record deal, you know the story? You heard
No,
it or
say
no?
it.
That's
No.
Bruno Mars.
Huh. Really? Wow. So how did the song, like, I mean, because it got picked up for the Olympic advertisements with NBC, like how did that part like start to happen,
Uh,
and how did the
Not
traction?
exactly clear. A lot of different people will try to take credit for those kind of things, and it was very unclear if it was the label or what. I think it came from the label side, and that's one of those things where it works out having a big label or a big manager, someone with those connections, and you get a major sync, and it's kind of a game changing moment in your career. If the song is right, if it's a really like a hit song, and now when we dropped the record and we were promoting that song in between tours, and granted I had like young kids and I'd be away from home for long periods of time and touring
Mm,
all over, I would go on these promo tours to
mm,
pop stations because pop stations weren't really playing King Without a Crown. Then there were like these alternative rock stations, a lot of them. And they had never really heard of me before, even though King Without a Crown was successful. So I would, go to these, radio shows and lunches and bring pizza and play one day for these people like day in and day out. And the song never did well on radio. It's just at that time again, like Epic took another cut. The whole promotion team got canned, and I was in the middle of that promo with One Day, and it didn't test well, and they didn't think it was a hit, at radio. So they didn't play it. But if it's the right song and it's really a hit song, um, and you have enough of a fan base, and then you score some kind of massive sync that kind of like shows it to the world, that song has been incredibly successful for me. It's been like the quintessential Matisyahu song for most people, and it's sung in synagogues as part of the prayer service. It's sung in churches. It's sung at summer camps. It's like one of those songs that just
mm.
snowballs and uh, becomes its own thing. So I'm honored to be have been a part of it, and kind of yeah. So it was a pretty cool moment for me.
Yeah, definitely was incredible. And the song was also like so much about like unification. Like it's even more relevant today.
Yeah, yeah. I find after October 7th and everything, the war, a lot of the Modest Yahoo songs in it kind of like take on a new reality. It's in a different context, but they're all sort of relevant, very relevant to the Jewish experience. So I think that it's been kind of awesome performing and singing those songs, and kind of with what's going on. It's been pretty powerful.
That's great.
All right.
Yeah. So, so Montes, just the last question I think that I have. You've got this EP coming out, Hold the Fire.
Yeah.
What do you want people to get from this EP? Like, what are you trying to convey now through this new piece of art?
Well, the EP, I released it. I think it was like February, and now what we made is this duo version of it. Like
Mm,
it's basically an acoustic version, but it's
yeah.
not a simple acoustic version because of the beatboxing. I'm doing like layers of beatboxing in the track, and the engineer producer that we worked with has some interesting effects going on, a little bit of percussion. And then Adam Weinberg, a good friend of mine I've been playing with for years, is doing all kinds of beautiful layering with the acoustic guitar and interesting stuff. And I'm really excited about it. I think that it's kind of like the songs are similar enough that people will really like know them, but they have a different twist to it. And it's what I do when I perform a lot of the time. I do these duo shows with Adam, and it's every song we listen to that we're gonna play. We kind of like put it through this process, and it comes out the other side, through us, just very raw, but with effects, with pedals, different stuff going on. So um, I'm kind of excited to share that on a record. I've never really done that. I've done a couple of acoustic records, but one with a cello and guitar and multiple guitars. This is the only time I've done something, in this way. And it's a big part of what I do. A lot of my time is spent doing these duo shows. So I'm excited to share it with everybody.
Definitely excited to see it. Actually, one more question I wanted to
Yeah.
say. Do you have, are there certain things that you haven't accomplished yet that you want to accomplish now, like maybe lyrically, or you want to create new types of music? Like, what do you aspire to do at this point in your life and your career?
Well, to be honest with you, started managing myself because a lot of my career, I had other people handling things for me as an artist, and being so busy, a father, I've got 6 kids. I mean, And so, in the industry and everything, I always had people doing stuff for me. And it didn't really serve me so well because I found myself with some financial problems. But on top of that, I never really got a strong understanding of the business. Now, over the years, there was a period where I managed myself for a couple years, and I've learned more about the industry. But right now, honestly, I'm managing my career, and I'm trying to really, that's become like the focus for me. Now, I know that's not the greatest thing for an artist because where does that leave time for you to be an artist? But life is about a lot of things. It's about, for me, it's been about, being a father, being a spouse. It's been about my fans. It's been about my music for sure. But in terms of like the day to day ins and outs of really knowing your business, that hasn't been my top priority. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I was on a long tour, for the last 7 months. I was across the states and in Israel and then back in Israel and playing a lot of shows at colleges, a lot of anti-Semitism going on. So have become kind of a voice for a lot of people, um, standing up for what I believe. And that's kind of a sort of started with 10 years ago. I got boycotted on this festival in Spain. So I
Oh,
sort of saw this happening before it happened on the mainstream level like it has now. And kind of prepared me at this stage in my life, kind of like a little bit more mature, not as easily drawn into certain things, like online and on the internet, and just kind of um, a little bit stronger maybe than I was in my 30s or my 20s. So anyway, so that's kind of where I'm at the same time, lots of shows, booking shows, playing shows. That's been my bread and butter for the last 20 years. So I continue to do that and I continue to enjoy it, play with incredible musicians, different musicians. And, um, you know, I love the songs. I love playing my songs. I love improvising. And that's been a big part. And then the ability to record music now is just incredible. So, the studio's at the crib. I work with a lot of different people. I've got a lot of friends. There's a lot of collaborations. I did like last year. I did about 5 months of collaborating with different writers and producers, and wrote 40 songs that
oh,
I've released five of them. I'm going to be releasing them continuously every month as singles or EP or whatever it is, but just putting out music, recording music. I love this place that we're in where you can make songs that are relevant to you in the moment and release them immediately and market them and promote them and live with them, and then on to the next one, and every song kind of gets its chance, as opposed to an album where you throw a bunch of songs on and one song is the single and that gets the video and all the money thrown at it. And, it's nice to have I'm enjoying this new kind of phase in music, and I feel it works well for me.
that's exciting. And it's good you're happy with this new phase. I appreciate you coming on. I mean, I think you've lived, really an incredible life so far and had a lot of positive impact and through your music, through, what you say vocally. And now, I mean, I'm excited to see how this new phase plays out and the EP that you're bringing out now, this new version of it, I think will be great. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate it.